Hi folks, welcome to this video on the modern Olympics. This is going to be about the values and the aims of the Olympics and also the pros and cons of major games such as the Olympics, of hosting these kind of events. But it's all that content is also transferable to hosting a Football World Cup, something like that. So just a little bit of a background on the modern Olympics. The modern Olympics came back in 1896 based on the ancient Olympics from 3,000 years ago in Greece. It was a French aristocrat, Baron Pierre de Coubertin, who two things with Baron Pierre de Coubertin. Number one, he was a student of history, so he knew about the ancient games in Greece and later on in Rome, in part of the Roman Empire. And something else in the 1850s, 1860s, 1870s, somewhere around about that time, not precise, he came across to England and he saw what public schools were doing with sport, taking mob games and turning them into proper sports. But he also saw the cult of athleticism. So physical endeavour and moral integrity, playing hard, playing fair, handshakes at the end, but abiding by rules and things like that. And he saw that and thought, this is what I want to bring back. I want to bring back the Olympic Games, but with this public school ethos. Now, if you get a chance to look at, it'll be on YouTube, the opening ceremonies of the London 2012 Games. Dr. Jacques Rogge, who was president of the IOC, we'll talk about them in a few minutes, he said in the opening ceremony, in many ways, the Olympic Games has come home tonight. And that confused a lot of people because they thought the Olympic Games were Greek. Why are you saying that at London Olympics? Is because he knew about Baron Pierre de Coubertin's experience watching public school boys play proper sport. And he built the modern Olympics off the back of that. The last thing we can say is his philosophy, which he says at the bottom there, was to bring people, nations together to compete under the banner of fair play, devoid of politics. Now, if you watch the video on political exploitation, this is why people are very wary of bringing politics into major sport events. Baron Pierre de Coubertin, the founder, said there should be no politics involved in the Olympics, and the priority being taking part over the winning. Now that's contentious because, everyone wants to win, don't they? So the intentions were right, but whether it happened and whether it still takes place, that's a different issue altogether. So these are a couple of slides that I use in my lessons. I just thought I'd bring them onto here. It saves me typing the information, you watching me write it down. The aims of the games then, right? Promote development of physical health, moral qualities, i.e. this thing about athleticism. Play hard, physical endeavour, but play fair, moral integrity. He also wanted to spread goodwill across the nations, but bring the best athletes in the world together. There's nothing wrong with pushing for excellence, okay, and using those elite athletes to showcase what can be achieved by human beings, but also to educate young people through sport, fair play, friendship, and those aims are still in the Olympic Games. Now, where the issues come in are things like, has sponsorship, has commercialization, and media coverage and things like that watered some of these down? Is there still as much goodwill across the nations? Because there's a medals table now, who's better than who, things like that. Does that push people to take risks and take drugs and things like that? So, again, lots of things going on. It's a constantly changing situation, but these are the aims of the games. And the values of the games, the Olympic values, they're promoted by the IOC. And again, I'll mention these in a minute. The motto of the games is Citius Altius Fortius, which means faster, higher, stronger. So that's it. The values of the game is about pushing yourself physically and mentally as high as you can to achieve the best you can achieve. Preserve dignity. Every human being must be allowed to take part in the sport without any form of discrimination. Males, females, all ethnic backgrounds, all religions, they've all got to be allowed to take part. And finally, that bottom point, generate harmony and global friendship. All nations coming together to just do sport and nothing else, no ulterior motive. Now, again, when you look at the Russian scandal, how Russia being banned from major games through persistent drug taking and covering up, organised by the government, is that still taking place? Is it being watered down? Is the price to be an Olympic champion greater now than it's ever been? And is that causing cheating? They're debates that they're going to happen for many, many decades, but these are the aims and the values of the Olympic Games. So two key organisations, I've already mentioned the IOC twice. The IOC International Olympic Committee was created in Paris in 1894. So the first Olympics of the modern era was in 1896. So the IOC was created 2 years before the first modern Olympics. It owns all the rights to the Olympics and is responsible for selecting host cities for summer and winter games. So when London got the games in 2012, it was the IOC that decided that, so they oversee everything that takes place. Now, the BOA, the British Olympic Association, was formed in 1905. You've had Olympic Games in 1896, you've had one in 1900 and one in 1904, and then by then, the British people realised actually we need a governing body to oversee selection for games, organisation, transport, things like that, someone to bring it all together. So the BOA was formed. We now more commonly call them Team GB, but they're responsible for planning Team GB's participation at Summer Olympic Games. They provide support to all the national governing bodies, so rowing, cycling, athletics, all the sports that take place at Olympic Games. Here's the crucial thing: the BOA is not controlled or funded by the British government. So this idea of keeping politics out of the Olympics. Now, because they're not funded by the government, they have to rely on big sponsorship deals in order to keep money going forward. It would be easy to say, oh, let's take some money from the government, but then you brought politics in. So, there's always that fine balance. And the BOA, as I said, is totally independent. And as I said, receives funding from sponsors and from businesses to keep the politics out. So that was a very brief background about the Olympics. Read into it, read your textbooks, because it will give you more information, but they're the key points. So the final part of this is hosting an Olympics or hosting a major games, a World Cup, something like that. Why would you want the job? Now, you might just go, why wouldn't you? Let's think about it. It's very, very expensive. When we hosted London 2012, the world was still coming out of a global recession. When we won the bid to host it, 2 years after, I think it was 2006, so 6 years before we did the games. 2 years later, 2008, we have the massive global recession. And it cost us £9 billion as a nation to build everything and put everything on for the Olympics. So why would you put yourself under that much financial pressure to host the major games? Now, this is very often an evaluate question or an analyze and a discuss. In other words, give pros and cons because of that. Now, there's 4 areas that they like you to be able to discuss, analyze, evaluate, etc., etc. So we're going to deal with them one at a time. So I know this slide looks information overload, bear with me, right? The first area that they could ask you to discuss, analyze, evaluate is discuss, analyze, evaluate the impact of a major games on the sport itself. So what are the impacts of hosting a major games on British rowing, British cycling, UK athletics, British swimming, things like that, okay? So there are pros and cons. Now, here's a top tip, and this is what I've got for other people, so I'm not the genius who comes up with these things. I've just tried to put it down in my own way. A top tip: the effects of hosting a major game on a sport can be remembered by thinking that most sports stars can now turn professional or become profs. So we're going to use the word profs as like a little bit of a memory model to remember things. If you see here, we've done P, R, O, F, F, S, and this will allow us to discuss, analyze, evaluate. So what are the impacts of major games on the sport itself? Well, P, profiles of the sport and participation rates both increase. When you see sport on TV, you naturally get more people doing that sport, and that is great because it gets you more participants to be able to select from to push through to elite level further down the line. However, where's your analysis point, your evaluation point? Not all sports are seen equally at major games. So netball, for example, is not in the Olympics. It's not an Olympic sport. So when you're watching the Olympics, athletics, people are watching it and they want to take part. Swimming, people are watching it and they want to take part, but no one's watching netball. So it stunts the number of people wanting to take part in netball. So the R stands for role models. So role models are created. and this increases the exposure of your sport. Usain Bolt did more for athletics than anyone in athletics history because everyone wanted to be like Usain Bolt, and he raised the profile of athletics greater than it's ever been. More people watched athletics because Usain Bolt was in it. Okay, so there's a positive. But the negative is these role models could then start to feel the pressure to be deviant, to take drugs, to cheat in some way in order to stay at the top. And that then ruins the image of the sport. You know, I watch cycling now in the Tour de France, and someone wins the Tour de France, and my first thought is, yeah, I wonder what they've taken. Because that sport has now got a bad history, particularly with Lance Armstrong, of people cheating and getting away with it for a long period of time. So again, that's a pro and a con. So the O stands for organised and better structured sport, more clubs to join. So, you know, clubs start to develop off the back of a major games because people have seen it on TV and they want to know, they want to take part, and there's a demand for it. So more clubs start to get set up. However, there's an access issue. Look at men's and women's football as an example. I bet wherever you live in your area, within 4 miles of where you live, there are probably 10 men's football team or boys football teams and maybe only one or two women's football teams or girls football teams. So there is still an access issue for many sports. One of the F's can stand for facilities. You've got world-class facilities left behind after hosting a major games, and that can allow you to develop and train more elite athletes in the future. However, some facilities cost a lot of money and then they don't get used. And the phrase we use for that is a white elephant. You've created a white elephant facility. You've spent millions on it, got used for 2 weeks heavily over the Olympics, another 2 weeks over the Paralympics, and after that, no one's been in it since. And that's a huge waste of money. One of the other F's stands for funding. So funding and sponsorship increases for the sport. If you're hosting a major games, you want, you know, if the UK are hosting a major games, we want Team GB to be doing well in all events. So sponsorship and funding increases for all those sports. However, as soon as that hosting event finishes, as soon as that Olympics is over, the funding is often cut. The sponsorship is often reduced or cut altogether. British basketball received something like £8 million worth of funding for London 2012. It's not received a penny since. So it's great when you're hosting. It's not great immediately afterwards. And finally, it links to this profs thing up here, the sport. Athletes can now become more professional. They can now start to train full time off the back of sponsorship deals, off the back of business endorsements and national lottery funding and things like that. However, this spits in the face of what Baron Pierre de Coubertin was all about, amateurism. It isn't about money. It's about honour and fair play. So there's an issue that's always been brought into the Olympics. So the next one is you might be asked to analyse, discuss, evaluate the impacts of a major games on society. So us, the people, okay? Now, my top tip here is the effects of hosting a major game on society can be looked at by how much society spent on the games. And it's spent with two T's. So S, social integration. In other words, people coming together to watch sport, going to the pub, okay? Getting people around your house when you and getting a barbecue going and getting the TV out in the garden, something like that. That's brilliant for society. However, many believe it's too much money to spend on sport and that money should go on healthcare and education instead. So that can split society, can bring people together, but it can also divide people because they think the money should be spent elsewhere. The P stands for participation. So participation increases, society gets healthier, you know, less strain on the NHS, things like that. However, many still just choose to watch and remain inactive. So it inspires many people to take part, but does it inspire all people to take part? Or does it just inspire a lot more people to watch, which isn't, you know, what we really want? E, employment. So jobs are created, getting ready for the games, construction, the service industry, hotels, restaurants, transport, things like that. However, once the games are over, those jobs no longer exist. So, you know, you've created a lot of employment in the short term, but it's not being sustained after that. One of the N's stands for national pride. The games generate a feel-good factor. Are we doing a great job hosting? Are our athletes and swimmers and cyclists and rowers, etc., performing really, really well? Don't we feel good about ourselves? However, coming away from the Olympics a little bit, in other sports like football, this national pride can lead to nationalism, and nationalism's kind of the politically correct word of saying hooliganism, racism, things like that. So it can quickly boil over in certain sports. One of the T's stands for transport. So transport links are improved. Okay, you get more rail, you get more bus lanes and things like that that can be used. However, that often leads to pollution and congestion. So you built all these roads and rail networks to get tourists in, to get spectators in, to get the athletes in, but it then leads to massive pollution and congestion. And finally, tourism is increased, and that can lead to more money coming in, spending in restaurants, buying merchandise, things like that. But sadly, it also increases the risk of terrorism. Remember, terrorists want to make a statement on the biggest stage when loads of people are there and there's many more watching. So if you're hosting a big sporting event, you naturally increase the risk of attracting a terrorist incident. Now, sadly, my brain gave up on these two. I couldn't literally think of any more ways. We had profs, we had Spence. I couldn't come up with any more ways of doing this. However, if you come up with any, please message me, let me know. The next one is impacts of the major games on the economy. Now, these ones are relatively more straightforward, so I don't think we need an acronym really. But, let's get some of these down. So when you're hosting a major games, you have an increase in income to the host city through spectators and tourism. Now, we're going to bring in ones that we've already mentioned. Don't worry about that. That's absolutely fine. Don't think of these points, they've got to be separate. If it's applicable, it's applicable. It's absolutely fine. We've just mentioned tourism in the last one. We can mention it in this one because the tourism brings in economic impacts. More jobs are created. We've just mentioned that in the last one. Perfect, because that has a beneficial impact on the economy, but also on society, as we just mentioned on the last slide. Tourism often increases for years after the games. It's estimated that London 2012 has brought in an additional 2 billion in tourism in the 4 years after the games, which is amazing because lots of people across the world were watching the games and seeing London and going, oh, fantastic, where should we go on holiday next year? Let's try London, or maybe go the year after. So there is a much longer impact in terms of tourism when you've hosted a major games, and you increase sales of products, merchandise, services, hotels, restaurants during and after the games. So there's really good economic impacts, positive ones. However, there's always going to be negative ones. So simply the cost. Britain spent 9 billion on getting London ready for the Olympics. Even the failed bid, when we put in the bid to host the 2018 Football World Cup, that bid cost 21 million to put in, and we got knocked out in the first round. Not of the World Cup, of the bid, first round of the bid to host the games. So it's a massively expensive thing to do. The jobs that are created are often lost after the games. We've mentioned that one already. So that's a negative economic impact. And failure and or underperformance in major games often leads to a drop in income. If you don't host the good games, you can lose sponsorship money, you can lose TV deals, you can lose merchandise deals. So when you are hosting the games, the pressure is on economically to make sure it's a good one. So finally then, the last area that you might be asked to discuss, analyse, evaluate the impact of major games on is on the political party, the government, the politics, that kind of thing. Okay. So again, I haven't been able to come up with a little memory model of doing this, but hopefully it's relatively common sense. And there's a lot of repetition on this one as well, points we've already seen. Positives, the world audience is watching your country. So the success of your teams at major games reflects well on the politicians and the political party in charge. Look how good our athletes are. So therefore, look how good we are as a country. Look how good we are as a government of this country. Hosting a major games brings unity and a sense of purpose and pride. And if you're the party in power, when everyone's feeling good, you're likely to get re-elected next time round. The major games are often used as a shop window for your city and country. And again, repeat of a point, but it's totally valid. That can lead to increased tourism. That can lead to job creation. That can lead to more money that you can spend on things as a country. And that's all reflects well on the political party in power at that time. But again, there are negatives. If the games cost too much, there's an increased chance that people will vote against those politicians in the future. Okay, there's an increased risk of terrorism, as we've mentioned, and terrorists wanting to make impacts at major games. And again, that's not a good thing for society. That's not a good thing for the political party in charge. Host cities will encounter much higher levels of congestion and pollution. And, climate change is very, very big on the agenda. And people are taking it much more seriously than they've ever done before, and quite rightly so. But that's going to have to be factored in. What are you doing in hosting these major games to offset some of this pollution and congestion? The political party have got to get that right. If a host nation underperforms at the games, this can reflect badly on the ruling party. Now, I've created a link there, Jesse Owens and the Nazi Olympics. Now, I'll put this in the negative, but that was a brilliant thing that, Jesse Owens, yeah, you need to, show that the Nazis are appalling and you need to go against them. But why I put that in there, I don't mean Jesse Owens is a negative, but one athlete, undermined the entire Nazi party. That's great, but that is what can happen. That's the power of one athlete underperforming and what it can have on a political party. So, that's the kind of thing that you've got to be thinking about. If the legacy is not achieved, okay, then it's an embarrassment for the political party. So look at London 2012. Strapline for the London 2012 Olympics was inspire a generation. Since 2012, participation rates in this country have gradually fallen every year since 2012. Not by very much, but they have fallen. Well, that's not good, is it? We haven't inspired a generation, and that's a bit of an embarrassment. So we need to do something about that. And finally, games can be used as a form of political protest. Now, again, I've put an example down where I think it was a brilliant thing that happened, the Black Power Salute, 1968 Mexico Olympics. But the point is, should politics be brought into the Olympics? Baron Pierre de Coubertin, the games should be devoid of politics, but the games can be used as a point for political protest. So these are the things that you could get asked about. These impact ones, you've got to know pros and cons. You've got to know good and bad. It's a really, really big part of the syllabus. Okay? So I hope you found this video useful, folks.